This lesson will be about working memory. We'll first review what working memory is and its importance. Then we'll discuss one of the major models of working memory and some of the biological bases and related factors. We'll conclude the lesson with a discussion of working memory dysfunction and disorders associated with that dysfunction. Working memory, broadly defined, is the ability to hold and manipulate information in your conscious awareness. One example of this might be if I were to give you several numbers and asked you to add them up in your head. Working memory falls under the umbrella of executive functioning, which is a broad cognitive domain that includes things like inhibitory behaviors, planning, and switching between tasks in addition to working memory. Like with all areas of cognition, there's natural variation between individuals. So even two people without working memory dysfunction may not perform identically on working memory tasks. Working memory plays an important role in everyday activities. In conversations, it helps you hold on to relevant pieces of information to formulate a response. It also helps you keep track of important verbal and nonverbal cues to maintain the fluidity of a given conversation. Working memory is also important when we follow instructions. When you cook a meal, for example, there are often multiple steps involved, and it's important to be aware of what pieces are done when, how much time is left on other pieces, what comes next, and even measurement changes. There are more quick calculations involved than you might even realize. Reading and studying also rely on working memory. You need to be able to remember important information while you read to understand the context of the next sentence or even the next part of a given sentence, as well as recall important characters, plot points, and information throughout. I'll mention this again later, but evidence suggests that working memory deficits can also be seen in the context of reading disabilities. There are other ways that working memory is involved in daily activities, and these are just a few. Alan Baddeley and Graham Hitch presented their model of working memory in the 1970s. This model split working memory up into multiple components. This model has been improved upon in the decades since, and the newer model, which I'll show you on the next slide, has become one of the dominant views of working memory. Although we won't be going into other working memory models as part of this lesson, I want to explicitly note that there are other working memory models that have been proposed. Take a second to look at the original model. Pause if needed. Imagine that your brain is like a computer. When you're working on a task, you need space to keep all of the information that you're processing. On your computer, that's RAM. For us, it's working memory. Based on that, let's talk about the components of Baddeley's original model. We'll start with the central executive. This is the control center. It's in charge of attention and coordinates the other parts of the system. In our computer example, we can compare it to the central operating system, which controls task management, handles errors, and prioritizes how much attention to allocate to different tasks. The phonological loop to the right deals with things you hear, including things you hear yourself say, and stores that information temporarily. For example, if someone tells you what building and classroom to go into in your school, and you repeat it silently until you can write it down, you're using the phonological loop. The phonological loop may also play an important role in learning new languages and in acquiring new vocabulary. The visuospatial sketchpad to the left deals with things you see and stores that information temporarily. Information in the visuospatial sketchpad can be moved into the phonological loop through silent rehearsal. For example, if someone shows you a map of where you need to go in the building to get to your classroom, and you visualize that to get there, you're using the visuospatial sketchpad. This is Baddeley's updated model of working memory. This updated model includes the episodic buffer, which is the most important addition that we'll consider here. The episodic buffer acts as a temporary storage area that can hold and combine information from the phonological loop, the visuospatial sketchpad, and long-term memory. It creates integrated episodes of information, hence the name. If a friend is telling you a story about their day, you're actively combining information about the story's plots, friends you know from previous interactions, as well as new people you haven't heard of, and how the places your friend's describing look. The episodic buffer helps you pull all of these different types of information together in your working memory. The most important contribution of this model to remember is that Baddeley's models suggest that there are different components of working memory that are responsible for handling different types of information. There are multiple biological bases of working memory. Here are some of the cortical areas of the brain involved. The prefrontal cortex, which is heavily involved in tasks of executive function, is one biological basis of our central executive. The prefrontal cortex plays a major role in working memory, managing information, and other higher order functions. The occipital lobe, which plays an important role in vision, is an important basis of our visuospatial sketchpad. The parietal lobe plays an important role in sensory integration, which is a major contribution of Baddeley's model of working memory. And language centers in the brain, like Wernicke's and Broca's areas, are important players in the phonological loop. These represent regions of the brain that are very spread out, and it emphasizes the fact that working memory requires a lot of systems working together in order to properly function. There are a number of factors that influence working memory, including but not limited to the ones shown here. As individuals age, working memory typically declines. That's not necessarily an issue. There are normal declines with age in many cognitive domains. However, sometimes these declines are more than what we would expect for typical aging, and in those cases, the decline may be related to disease and injury processes like dementias. Mental illness and stress can also negatively impact working memory. These effects can be modifiable in some cases and aren't necessarily permanent. Lifestyle factors can include diet, exercise, sleep, and other modifiable behaviors. Poor diet and exercise can lead to both chronic and acute effects on working memory, especially because of their relationship to cardiovascular disease and stress. Bilingualism is an interesting one up here because although being bilingual or multilingual is associated with better working memory, there may be a bidirectional relationship here. I mentioned earlier that working memory, especially the phonological loop component, may be an important aspect of acquiring a second language. It may be that being bilingual improves working memory, but better working memory may also make it easier for individuals to acquire new languages. Working memory dysfunction is associated with difficulty carrying out many day-to-day activities. Individuals with poor working memory may have difficulty following instructions, making mental calculations, they may struggle academically or with reading, and they may even have difficulty maintaining conversations. This is not an exhaustive list, and as we've seen, working memory may include multiple components and can influence a wide variety of activities. Because of how important working memory is, it may, or may not, depending on your perspective, be surprising how many disorders and diseases are associated with working memory deficits. Many of these are not age-related. These are only a handful examples, but while diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are both associated with working memory deficits and may be more expected, you can also see that there's a relationship to disorders like ADHD, learning disabilities, especially reading disabilities, and disorders like anxiety and depression. This concludes our review of working memory.